In today's video, we're going to be taking a look here at the current conditions where there is a major nor'easter taking place, going to bring a pretty big snowstorm up from the northeast. So we'll take a look at that in just a moment. We're also going to be taking a look at multiple upcoming snowfall opportunities in a very similar region up there in the northeast coming up, and some colder air on the way in the long range. But we're going to be talking about that kind of from both perspectives because there is a chance that that's a little bit more underwhelming than originally anticipated. Let's go ahead and take a look at the current conditions. We can see that there is a lot of showery activity is kind of what I'm noting this morning. It looks like no really consistent precipitation taking place in this area out west at all. It's kind of just showery activity out there. The more consistent storminess is going to be this major nor'easter beginning to take place up there for the northeast. So let's work our way from west to east though. We do have a bit of a more minor low here taking place over Washington, and we can see the precipitation right near that low, twirling and swirling there offshore of Washington and Oregon, and this is bringing some pockets of moderate precipitation in there and some areas of lighter precipitation. As we work our way further south, again, it's more showery looking than anything really, and even maybe some thunderstorms taking place here across the valley there. Definitely an interesting look. Obviously, snowfall in these higher elevation regions of the Sierra Nevadas, and then going to be rainfall there in the lower elevation areas. We can see here that there is definitely some precipitation taking place near LA. Something interesting to note here is look at how slow moving these showers are here, and then we see some lower level showers here moving much, much quicker. And this indicates that there is different speeds of wind happening here at different levels for sure. Very quick moving here, and then very, very slow up here to the north. So we have a lot of interesting things taking place. Now, as we take a look here, just a little bit further east here, we can see a lot of snowfall taking place there across some of the southern Rockies there. Obviously going to be rainfall in those lower elevation regions. And there is some pockets of heavier precipitation in there, I would say. And the more consistent precipitation is taking place here near Idaho and Utah here, where we can see there is a pretty big swath of snowfall taking place across most of those regions at this point. Now we're going to draw our attention towards this nor'easter, which is a very strong one there offshore. And this is going to make its way closer to the coast, and we're going to see more and more of this precipitation making its way towards New England here. As we can see, for southern Massachusetts, this is where a majority of this snowfall is taking place right now. You can see for Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, as well as for the Cape Cod area here, we are seeing extremely heavy snowfall in these areas. The whites is going to be very heavy snowfall, and those blues within the whites are going to be even heavier. Whiteout conditions taking place here along this region here in southeastern Massachusetts. And this is just going to continue to spread in to a lot of these pockets here in southern New England. So we need to watch for that closely on the model guidance in just a minute. So what we're going to go ahead and do is move on. We're going to take a look at that model guidance and just dive into what's upcoming over the next 10 and even more beyond that days. Now, as we take a look here at our European model, we can see that there is quite a bit of activity taking place out west as we move just a little bit beyond what's happening currently. By the time we're reaching this afternoon as well, we will see even more snowfall starting up here for southern New England. Again, this low is pretty far offshore, so we're seeing this snowfall just on the very edge. And if you've been on the East Coast this weekend, you know that it has been cold enough to support snowfall. It's just been no precipitation. Even a lot of snowfall flurries happening up and down the East Coast, as we kind of noted yesterday. We saw a lot of that happening. By the time we reach Monday afternoon, well, what we'll see here by the time we're reaching about maybe the early morning hour is going to be New England, seeing some snowfall and freezing rain depending on where you're at. But definitely a bit of a snowstorm there. We could see that the flow of things is still like this because we see 1, 2, and 3 here as far as these lows. This isn't going to last too much longer, but we do see the consistent storminess. We even get this storm here across the United States, which is looking a little bit heavier on the southeast side of things for Tuesday the 17th there, the low overhead for the Great Lakes. And we see storm number 2 there and number 3. So definitely still this type of a flow. But what we see is these cold fronts developing underneath the lows. So we will see one develop underneath this. And this is why we get the precipitation still for the East Coast, because it's in the form of those cold fronts. Now, as we continue on, we can see storm number 2 by the time we're reaching Wednesday is much more major here. We have snowfall here on the northern end for Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, and we see a lot of severe weather potentially on the northern end here as we get this warm sector look. We've talked about this many different times so far this January, many more times than I anticipated we would ever say during January, but sure enough, here we are. And that swinging cold front with those warm temperatures surging in from the Gulf of Mexico is why we get severe weather here. We see the swinging cold air, and we see the warm air out ahead, warm, humid, and very stormy air. And we can see that this just develops and stretches further and further as this warm front surges northward here. So we see the warm front pushing, and we see the cold front swinging behind. And this is why this area in here in particular is going to be very intense likely and bring a severe weather threat with it for Wednesday, Thursday, and into Friday potentially as well. Although things look to very much so dry up here along the southeast by Friday now, according to the model. Now, you will note that there is some snowfall here on the northern end of things for the Great Lakes and the Northeast, so that's worth mentioning. More and more of that is being trended in, actually. Then, by the time we're reaching about the 21st, 22nd time frame, we get a pretty interesting pattern here. And what we see is the jet stream doing something like this, just like this right here. So there's plenty of cold air kind of bottlenecked in there. And we see this kind of stormy, humid air surging in along that jet stream on the southern end, and there is prime real estate right here for that storm to move into that would bring a snowstorm. Again, right here where I'm putting the arrow above is where we're kind of watching for snowstorm potential there. And we see this does match up here. We get a little bit of mixing here on the southern end of things, but right up in here, there's plenty of cold air, and this becomes kind of like a Miller B nor'easter. We've noted this before. So again, the storm track is something just like this. So it moves through these areas here, and then it brings kind of a stronger low. So we see it's first off located right here, but it's going to get stronger as it moves further and further northeast, as you can see, dropping all the way down to a 991, I think. And the good thing about this is that it is pretty far offshore, so some of that windiness might be reserved for offshore, but we do get plenty of moderate to heavy snowfall here for all of New England, it appears here, according to the European model right now. Now, keep in mind, it is nearly 200 hours out, so still take this with a grain of salt, but it is interesting to see. And then, as you can see, we get even more cold air diving into the eastern United States by the time we're reaching the 24th, according to, again, this European model, which has been the most reliable all year. We do see the southern jet connecting with this northern jet, which is another good sign there for cold and snow. And then we get another nor'easter developing here by the time we're reaching the 25th, again, diving that cold air to the south here and bringing snowfall again to New England and some of the Northeast as well. So pretty prime pattern potentially upcoming 20th to 25th. We've been saying that after the 20th looks more favorable for weeks now, if you guys have been keeping up with the videos. And sure enough, that continues on this model run, but we're still taking it with a grain of salt for the time being. Now, total precipitation through the next 10 days, we can see that most of that activity is going to be along the western states as they get berated by multiple storms there. And then also these storms will somewhat move across the nation like this, like we mentioned earlier. And below, that's going to bring plenty of precipitation as well. So the East Coast and West Coast gets the most, whereas the areas in between get a little bit less. Anywhere in the whites is practically no precipitation, your grays being 1/10 of an inch or less, greens being 1/10 of an inch to 1/2 an inch, blues 1/2 inch to an inch, your yellows 1 inch to 2 inches, reds 2 to 5 inches there, where we see these red areas along the east and the west, which is pretty much been the benchmark for very stormy 10-day period for me. The 2 to 5 inch region for a 10-day period is quite a bit. And then we even get these kind of brownish grays up here in the northwest and southwest of Canada, and that is 5 to 10 inches, so even stormier up there. Now, for the total snowfall here, we can see that there is plenty across the nation, including now the Northeast and some portions, pretty exclusive portions of the Mid-Atlantic. So, multiple snowstorms happening here, bringing 10 inches plus to a lot of New England. Certainly something to track moving forward. Anywhere in the grays is a dusting, if anything. Blues 2 to 6 inches of snowfall, purple 6 to 10, pinks 10 to 20 there. And then your pastel blues will be 20 to 35, pastel pinks being 35 inches and beyond. Now, as we take a look here at this GFS model, I just want to move through with it all the way to where we get a little bit more uncertainty. So after the 20th here, we do get this storm here. Same way, we kind of get it sliding off to the northeast right here, becoming a bit of a Miller B nor'easter. So we see this take place. And again, a very similar solution. So good to see agreement here. Certainly plenty of snowfall here for pretty far northeastern United States. Afterwards, though, we get a bit more of some cutter systems as kind of opposed to the European model. We get this jet stream doing this again, which is bringing warm air all the way up the East Coast and then cold more for the central United States. with some snowfall perhaps for the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley, as well as some of the south central United States. Pretty interesting stuff there. And we pretty much continue on with that type of a pattern. It looks like this model by the 30th, which is extremely far out, so I urge you to take this with a grain of salt, does show somewhat of some activity here in the Mid-Atlantic, but this has been absolutely the worst model all year, so I am doubtful, to say the least. The GFS, or the Canadian model, better yet, however, has been a lot better than the GFS model this year, which is unusual, because most years this model is worse than the GFS slightly, but this model has been actually significantly better than the GFS model this year. However, we do, around the 20th, instead of what the European model shows with this kind of storm heading off the northeast with a snowstorm here in the northeast, as you can see, something like that is what the European model shows. I'm going to draw it in the red here, but what the Canadian model shows is a much different solution with that track hundreds of miles west, and we get more of a snowstorm here for the Great Lakes and upper Midwest, as well as some of the plains there. So again, yellow is European, the red there is that Canadian model. Pretty interesting to see major disagreement from these models that we've noted have been very similar this year. We get a very unsimilar look here. We do get some cold finally here by the 25th on this model, starting to pour into the eastern United States, it appears, and some storm minutes underneath looking to connect perhaps with that cold air. So that potential is still there later on this model, but the European model is much more progressive with us getting into a cold and snowy pattern eventually. Now, like I mentioned, we are taking all of this with a grain of salt still. I do feel like there is a lot of good signs here. I've mentioned it many times. I do generally this time of year want more cold and more snow personally. It's not about what I want, but I am mentioning that. So for me, this does look sort of promising for that type of weather to take place. But I would still say have your reservations here because these models, as you've probably noticed, have shown things like this only to kind of fall away from it as we get closer. So we're going to continue to track this daily with some reservations in mind, but obviously as we get closer, that confidence will increase. So I urge you to stay tuned with us, subscribe. We do upload daily, and just keep up to date with what we're expecting here in the upcoming pattern. I feel like we're on the brink of having something big here. But the confidence just needs to come up a bit here. So be sure to subscribe. Be sure to also hit that bell icon and click all videos so you get notified when we upload. Also like the video if you did enjoy it. And leave a comment down below, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video.